Olá, estamos começando o Seminário Internacional Comunicação Multimodal, Arte, Política, Cultura e Ciência. Esse Seminário Internacional é uma realização do Grupo de Pesquisas Multimundos e também de 2 programas de pós-graduação da Universidade Federal de Mato Grosso, o Programa de Pós-Graduação em Estudos de Cultura Contemporânea, o ECO, e o Programa de Pós-Graduação em Comunicação e Poder, o PPGcom. De hoje até a última sexta-feira de junho, dia 27 de junho, vão passar por aqui pesquisadores, professores de excelência na área de comunicação multimodal, professores de Chipre, de Portugal, da Espanha, do Brasil, da Colômbia e dos Estados Unidos. Hoje estamos começando a primeira palestra, a palestra de abertura, com a professora doutora Sandra Ristovska. Ela é professora da Universidade do Colorado em Boulder. Ela vai fazer a sua apresentação em inglês. Sandra, it's a pleasure to have your participation in an international seminar on multimodal communication. And we will be pleased to welcome researchers from Brazil, Colombia, Cyprus, Portugal, Spain, and United States, with Professor and Research Sandra Ristovska. This event is multilingual, and we will also have a guest speaker who will give their presentation in Portuguese, English, and Spanish. Sandra will give her presentation in English. But Sandra, I'm going to introduce you or our audience in Portuguese. Sandra Ristovska é professora associada em estudos de mídia na Universidade do Colorado em Boulder, nos Estados Unidos. É documentarista e sua pesquisa multimodal se baseia no entendimento de que, sem a orientação sistemática e aplicações para o tratamento de imagens como evidência, os direitos civis e os direitos humanos correm o risco de serem reconhecidos e defendidos de forma desigual. Sandra Ristovska é também coordenadora do Grupo de Trabalho de Pesquisa em Comunicação Multimodal da IMCR, Associação Internacional de Pesquisa em Mídia e Comunicação. É um novo grupo de pesquisa da IMCR, que terá a sua primeira participação no próximo mês de julho, no Congresso da entidade em Singapura. Sandra, you have 40 to 45 minutes for your presentation. Then we have time for a question from our student. Thank you, you for your participation, my friend. It's a very, very deep honor for us to have a presentation in this seminar. Okay? Can you start?
Yes, thank you so much, Pedro, for the kind introduction, for the kind invitation. For the students here, I've admired the work that Pedro has been doing with the audiovisual essay and how to communicate science in a different format. And we've been colleagues and working together both at the IMCR task force that he mentioned and the IMCR working group. So it's a real honor and pleasure to be with you today. My main language is Macedonian. English is my second language. I was born and raised in Macedonia. So I apologize. I don't speak Portuguese, but I've always admired Portuguese. So my lecture will be in English, but feel free to, if you feel more comfortable, to ask your questions in Portuguese or Spanish if they're Spanish speakers. And I think Pedro can translate. I have working knowledge of Spanish, not of Portuguese. So maybe next time we do this, I can do parts in Portuguese. Okay, let me share my screen now. And I'll minimize this to open the presentation, and I'll just ask Pedro, can you see this?
Yeah, I see?
Okay, perfect. So today I'll be talking about how we communicate multimodally across media and law. And it's really, the lecture will be structured in 3 parts. I will talk to you more about why I believe multimodality is an important research lens in the field of media and communication studies. Then we'll talk just a little bit about visual epistemologies, which is where my area of work lies. And then the larger portion of the lecture will be focused on an example of multimodal research. And this is my exhibition, Justice by Video. So let us start. Now, media and communication studies have long rested on the power of text, despite the discipline's interest in the multiple forms in which communication practices take shape. So think about this. When you go to classes or when people produce research, they tend to write books, they tend to write articles, you tend to write seminar papers, you write exams. So it's all in words. But as media and communication studies scholar, we don't just study text. We don't just look at newspapers and books and magazines. A lot of what we study are images, sound, social media platforms, which are by definition multimodal. We're interested in music. We're interested in popular culture. So media and communication scholars regularly study different media, images, sound, music, performance. But for some reason, the underlying assumption for a very long time has been that words are the only appropriate, if not the only legitimate vehicle for presenting research findings, for doing academic work. And so what that has meant is that audiovisual essays, documentary films, photo essays, sound projects, installations, performances, oral history, projects, etc., have been typically assumed to be just art, that they belong in the realm of creative expression, but they don't belong to media and communication research proper, right? Again, when you go to conferences, you present papers, you don't show media work. But the contradiction is that what Canadians called research creation, what Europeans called arts-based research, what Latin American academia has a long history in participatory media making, the importance of ethnographic film around the world. These are all multimodal practices that have long been part of the scholarly engagement and vocabulary in media and communication studies. So over the last 20 years, there has been a proliferation of published studies on the value of multimodal scholarships. Now, scholars around the world already work with different definitions and terms. As I mentioned, research creation, arts-based research, participatory media, ethnographic film, science communication, audiovisual essays, and many others. So these calls over the last 20 years have really emphasized the need to use multimodality as an overarching umbrella term to raise critical questions about how media and communication studies can incorporate multimodality as an additive to what we already do, because each particular form of knowledge production has its own affordances, possibilities, and limitations. So here you see some of the work of your own professor. Pedro is here. You see John Jackson, who is now a provost at the University of Pennsylvania in the United States, thinking about how documentary filmmaking can count as scholarship. Here we have Nico Carpentier, who is a professor in the Czech Republic and a former IMCR president, who is thinking about how to move the field beyond the primacy of text. Publications on arts-based research practices, and Professor Lisa Henderson in Canada, who is a dean at the School of Communication at Western University in Ontario, thinking about multimodality as the future of media and communication studies. So these written articles are just there, have been there to really draw attention to the importance of multimodal research. But it's actually the experiments in the field that have inspired these publications and that have inspired these calls. So for example, here on the screen, you see a book published by MIT Press, so by an academic press in the United States, which is well regarded for publishing scholarly books. But the book itself is like a comic book. You see it on the side. So Red Lines, Political Cartoons, and the Struggle Against Censorship is a collaboration between Professor Sherian George at Hong Kong University and a comic book artist. So Professor Sherian George conducted the research on censorship in political cartoons, and then he partnered with this artist so that the book doesn't look like your traditional book when you read everything, or here there are a few image examples, but actually the very format itself is presented as comic books. So I'm using this as one very interesting example of what multimodal scholarship can do. Another thing is this is an exhibition on the politics of witnessing in Jamaica, conducted by Caribbean scholar, Professor Deborah Thomas at University of Pennsylvania. So she published a book on this project, so very traditional book, but she also did a documentary film, and then she had an interactive exhibit to really kind of hone in on the possibility of text, of sound, of image, of video, to highlight the importance of her research findings, both within academic settings, but also for broader publics. A similar experiment is the documentary Making Sweet Tea. This is about oral history projects of Black gay men in the US South. Now, if you know anything about US politics, the South has its own specific history. Politically, it has long been assumed to be more conservative. So this is about how these Black gay men navigate those environments. Now, this is by Professor E. Patrick Johnson, who is the dean at the School of Communication at Northwestern University in Chicago. And for this project, he also incorporated multiple modalities. So first, he collected the oral histories. Then he created a theater performance based on those interviews. He then turned those oral histories into a book. So again, he published the traditional book, and afterwards he made a documentary on this project. And so each different kind of mode of communicating the findings, so from theater to book to film, leverage the affordances, the uniqueness, and the possibilities of the medium to highlight something new, to draw us emotionally, to get us engaged with the histories, to get us engaged with the political context, to get us engaged with questions about identity in different ways, and also while broadening how many people could get engaged with these research findings. So this is just kind of briefly, by no means these are the only example. There are many, many examples, right? This is just few different formats that I wanted to highlight as an example. But to me, what is interesting, so kind of to highlight the things, right? To summarize what I already said so far, is that multimodal scholarship is central to media and communication studies. We should take it just as seriously as we take words seriously, as we take text and books seriously. Multimodality moves beyond the primacy of text as the only legitimate mode of knowledge production to engage with pressing social, cultural, political, and humanistic questions. So the censorship of cartoons clearly engage with political question in the form of a comic book, right? A social and cultural question. Well, think about the Making Sweet Tea documentary and the project on identity of Black gay men in the US South, right? So there are important questions that we can engage with multimodal formats in the same way that there are important questions that we engage with in text. And the critical point that I want to make is that this is not a substitute, but it is an additive. It is in addition to traditional scholarly output. So when we talk about multimodality, we don't want to say nobody should publish books anymore and nobody should read anything anymore. No, what we want to say, books have their place and they're very important, but so does video, so does sound, so does performance. They should all be taken seriously for us to engage as media and communication researchers. So what are the stakes with multimodality? Well, there could be many, but I'm going to give you 4 overarching stakes that I think are important for us to pay attention to. The first is epistemological. The idea here is that each form of knowledge production has its own affordances, possibilities, and limitations. And if we're constantly translating sound and image into words, we might be losing something important in that translation process. So there are some questions that are best tackled in text, but there might be some research question that could be approached in a different format. So the second point is methodological. The idea that we can theorize through production and we can theorize as production. So what do I mean? Typically, at least in the kind of Western academic context, there has been a strong divide between what's theory, what's practice. Theory has to be in books. You have to write theory. Practice is everything else. That's art. You can make a film, but that's on the side. That's not research. You're not using film to communicate research findings. You're using film as an art. Well, that was never really true. Right? It's an antiquated distinction that has never made sense. And now with the arrival of new media technologies and how much everybody now is consuming information online, on social media, in video, in sound, in short text, etc., it's become even more prevalent that we can't draw those kind of distinctions between theory and practice. And we need to understand that theory and practice can be inextricably linked. So multimodal research seeks to bridge the gap between theory and practice by drawing on the methodological tools we already use in media and communication studies for data collection, data analysis, data interpretation, and data representation, while also searching for different modes of expression that the research question calls for. And I'll give you an example of this soon. But the point is, if you're doing some work that can be best addressed in image, multimodality says use the visual language to address your research question while still being true to the humanistic and social scientific methodologies we are all training as media and communication scholars. So by doing so, multimodality can advance what Patricia Levy calls critical conversations about the nature of social scientific practice and expand the borders of our methodological repository. In other words, multimodality adds something to our toolkit. We can do more. Text, we can do a lot, but if we add multimodality, we can suddenly expand the horizon of the kind of research questions we can ask and expand the horizon about how we can communicate our research findings. Now, the next stake is ethical. Multimodality embraces the same research principles and academic rigor as the text-based research, right? This is not something, oh, you're doing less. No, you're doing the same. You're just exploring a different format. And a very important component here is that multimodality often embraces the ethics of care and collaboration. Why? Because it's very obvious how to make a documentary film, to make an audiovisual essay, to make an exhibition, a performance. You're drawing on so many collaborations, and they need to be properly acknowledged, properly credited, and dealt with in an ethical manner. Again, this is also true of regular research. Multimodality just emphasizes how much careful we need to be. And the last point that I want to make are the political considerations. This, in our calls to move beyond the hegemony of text, what we're actually trying to do is democratize knowledge production. We're trying to engage with different constituencies and communities that our scholarly work is intended to serve. So think about this. sometimes we write about important questions about society, about politics, about culture. And we want people to hear us talking about these issues. But all if we're doing is writing research articles that just other professors read, are we really communicating to the people that are important for what we are trying to do, right? So multimodality enables us to leave the university space and to engage with other communities, with other stakeholders who are relevant to the work that we're trying to do. And in the process, what we're doing is we're democratizing academic knowledge production. So in this context, multimodal scholarship has particular value for addressing a diverse population of scholars and students, and for engaging with intellectual energies that have not always been formally recognized within institutionalized academia. IMCR, the International Association for Media and Communication Research, and ICA, the International Communication Association, have both set up task forces and working groups in the last few years to sustain conversations about institutional support, policy, and guidance for multimodal scholarship. As I said, Pedro is heavily involved with these initiatives, as I am, and I know that some of you have come to IMCR, and I urge you to come in the future to engage with this work and potentially present on your own research there. But what motivates this institutional work on multimodality? I think it's what the underlying motivation is the idea that multimodality holds promise for a more inclusive global field of media and communication studies that speaks directly to the constituencies that our research is intended to serve. And that's the importance of it. Now, I talked about the epistemological differences between different formats, right? Between text and words. And my work is primarily in the realm of visual epistemologies. So I'm going to do that a little bit with you today. Unpack just a little bit. We don't have too much time to go over this. I teach an entire class, a whole seminar over a whole semester called Visual Epistemology. But in my two books that I've published before, Seeing Human Rights, Video Activism as a Proxy Profession, and Visual Imagery in Human Rights Practice, I have really dealt with the question of visual epistemology. I have studied how and why video is a unique form of knowledge, looking at its deployment in human rights settings. So from courts to journalistic setting and to political environments, and what does video do in these processes? And so to kind of give you an overview of the arguments, I've shown that the affordances of video as a technology, its ability to record, to process information, and to transmit cognitive, affective, and sensory information that may not be available to store otherwise, make it a unique mode of knowledge. So what do I mean? Think about it. If you see me talking, you will see my hand gestures, right? You will see where I look. Do I look at everybody in the room? Do I just look at one person? Do I look down? Do I look up? That's body language that communicates something, right? Now, when I talk, I might have pauses sometimes, right? I might stop, take a break. I might stop because, for example, we start laughing. Or I may stop because somebody's talking about something traumatic and we all pause because we're trying to be respectful to what somebody is sharing in a public context, right? So if all of that is experienced in person, we have a lot, but maybe you won't see what everybody is doing. Now, if you have that on video, let's say you might see my hand gestures, you might notice when I pause, when I change my modality, when I'm quieter, when I start talking louder to make a point, right? You can see all of that. You can hear all of that in a sound recording. You won't see my hand gestures, but you would see the changes in my voice. Now think about if you just had a transcript on text. Well, if you had transcript, not only would not see my body language, you would not see the changes in my tone of voice, where I pause, right? All of that would be edited out. All you would have is the text itself. So here is why I'm saying video can sometimes afford us to do a lot, right? It can help us transfer valuable information across time and space, right? Record it and make it available as a record afterwards. Now, its predecessors, photography and film, transformed at the time human perceptions and were seen as ripe for political engagement. I don't have time to go into this, but think about the day when photography came about. Suddenly you could mechanically take a photograph of a real moment that was very different from painting, and that was very different from text at the time. And that really transformed our understanding of perception, our understanding of vision, for both good and bad. Now, the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory and Walter Benjamin have thought about photography as particularly suitable for political engagement. And there is a legacy of using photography, film, and video for activist purposes. There's also legacies using them for harmful purposes, but there is that kind of political engagement that has been closely associated with the visual medium. Now, what's also interesting is that video as a technology, as a medium, has been central for the development of theories about trauma and testimony. It's actually when people were able to video record testimonies of trauma survivors that they were able to develop theories about how traumatic experiences affect people, and were able to advocate for policies to help trauma survivors. This is less acknowledged history, but scholar like Amit Pinchevsky has a beautiful book on this that talks about the uniqueness of video and what video as a mode of knowing has been able to contribute to our scholarship. And then, of course, video has been critical in human rights practice, where it is assumed that video's communicative power rests on its ability to hold emotions differently from words. What it does is, according to the human rights practitioners that I've interviewed, it puts the human back in human rights. Human rights practitioners talk about how text is all about numbers. This many people are affected. This is where they're affected. This is what's happening. And that's way too legal. And the fact that they're actual human beings who are experiencing rights violations sometimes gets lost in the story. And so that's what they mean when they say video puts the human back in human rights. So as a result, video can create witnessing publics for human rights testimonies across various law and policy settings. Now, video today is digital. And so the digital infrastructure of video make it tricky, because now video doesn't just record light and sound, and so we get the moving images with sound, but video today has metadata. It records all kinds of information, from the time it was recorded to the location to GPS coordinates. A lot of contextual information goes into the digital file itself. Now, the benefit of this is that human rights investigators have been able to use videos for investigations and to bring court cases in front of international courts and tribunals that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to put together. The downside is that video today is really a surveillance technology. It collects all kinds of information on everybody that can then be stored, accessed, and those who violate human rights can access this information to do harm, not necessarily always good. But the point is, video is unique technology, because when we write something, I mean, sure, we can write the data, etc., but we cannot easier embed as much information as video as a digital file today can do. So these are some examples, very brief, about the many ways in which text and video are complementary, but different forms of knowing. And we need to take visual epistemology seriously, because, for example, the way video communicates is very different from how text communicates. So let me show you some examples. Like, stop with the theoretical framing of this, but let's think about more practically. One of the differences is that images have a relational logic. Text has a linear logic. What do I mean by this? Well, to read this sentence, you go from left to right, top to bottom, and you understand what's happening. Sometimes when you try to briefly skim an article, if you don't read from beginning to end, what you tend to do is, like, you know that you go from top to bottom, and that's how you're able to gather a sense of what that text does. Images are different. If we look at just one image, still image, a photograph, we may first notice one thing. Let's say on our video platform, you first may have noticed actually the screenshots with Pedro and me, right? And now if you look at this screen, you might see the text first, or you might see the black screen first, right? And then you draw a relationship between the moments. But with moving images, something very interesting is happening that illustrates this logic. And so I'm going to show you a very, very brief video, which is very well known because it was done at the beginning of the 20th century by a Russian filmmaker, Lev Kuleshov. So think about this. Film is new. We're talking about those film strips, like the old school film. And film is new. And filmmakers were trying to figure out, how do we use this? How do we edit? Montage was still not like quite known. People were really trying to figure it out. And so Lev Kuleshov was a very famous Russian filmmaker and mathematician who decided to play an experiment. And so he told an actor to have a neutral face. And he was like, I'm going to film you. You just have a neutral face. Stand still, have a neutral face. Okay, the actor did that. But then in the editing, Kuleshov used that one image of the actor and put different images after it. And then ask audiences, what do you see? What do you think? So I'm going to show you that, and then we'll talk a little bit about it.
The theoretician Lev Kuleshov also experimented with film editing. In his most famous study, he took a shot of a Russian actor and intercut it with 3 different objects: a bowl of hot soup, a distraught woman draped across her husband's coffin, and a little girl playing with a teddy bear. When audiences saw the film, they raved about the actor's performance. How hungrily he looked at the soup. How sorrowfully he gazed at the woman. And how tenderly he watched the little girl.
So, as you can see, the actor has the same face. What's different is that after the image of the actor, you see the bowl of hot soup, the woman at the coffin, and the girl with the teddy bear. And when Lev Kuleshov asked audiences, so what are you seeing here? They're like, oh, wow, the actor's performance is just brilliant. He must be very, very talented actor, because look how hungry he looks at the soup. Look how sad he is when he sees the woman at the coffin. And now look how tenderly he looks at the little girl who's just playing with her teddy bear. Now, we know it's the same expression. So it's clearly not about the actor's performance. What it is, it's about the viewing context. And here's what I mean: images have a relational logic. We relate the image before to the image after. We draw inferences about what's happening based on the relationship between the different images. It's not about acting. It's not about any one image per se. It's about the context of the images. So the idea okay, now I don't know whether I can ask you to participate, but if you can, and maybe Pedro, you can tell me what students are saying. I'm curious what everybody is seeing in this image. Can you tell me what you're seeing in this image? Anything that comes to mind. Maybe let me stop share for a minute.
Okay, is it different? Is a black and white, like a mosaic?
Like a mosaic, okay, excellent. I'm going to go back to the screen, and Pedro, maybe you tell me if the students can write comments. What are they saying?
Ok. Olha, por favor, podem comentar aí o que vocês acham ou perceberam o que viram, por favor.
So Pedro is seeing mosaic. Is anybody seeing anything else?
Ok. Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Yeah, okay. So sometimes people see mosaic. Sometimes people think it's an X-ray, like when you go to the doctor. Sometimes people see aerial images, like drone footage from above. It's some kind of landscape. Actually, this is a photograph of a cow. Now, if I tell you it's a cow, can you see the cow? Pedro, maybe you can translate in Portuguese that this is a cow and see whether they can see the cow.
É como se fosse um gado, um boi, cow, ou uma vaca, é um rebanho.
Yeah, and so for us to see the cow, we can really draw a relationship between the different elements we see. So where is very black, those are the big black circles, that's where the cow's ears are. Now the small black circles, that's where, and we're kind of going down, those are the eyes. We come down to the mouth of the cow and we see the cow. But was it easy to see a cow? Not really. Some people immediately see a cow. Some people see something else. Some people draw a different relationship. And, when people say this is, let's say Pedro thought about mosaic. Somebody thought of X-ray. That's because we relate this image with prior experiences about things we've seen before. This reminds us of a mosaic, or this reminds us of an X-ray image because maybe we've had a broken arm or leg at some point. We went to a doctor, they took an X-ray, and now we know what X-ray looks like, right? It's very dark, it's unclear, you have to be expert to understand it. So for those kind of responses, we draw on the relationship between this image and things we've seen in the past. We also draw on our own experiences. What do we know? What we've seen? And so this is the relational logic of images in a different context. But what both the Lev Kuleshov experiment and this image of a cow, it's an actual photograph of a cow. So this is not Photoshop, this is not invented, it's an actual photograph played with creatively of a cow. But what these examples tell us, that seeing is more than what our eyes physically see. So when we say seeing, it's not just about what our eyes physically see. It's about the experiences and ideas that we as viewers bring to the image. It's also about our cognitive processes and how our brains are wired to process visual information. And that's very different from other modes of communication. So for example, 50% of our cortex, which is a part of our brain, is dedicated to processing visual information. Our brains have 1 million, so 1 million optical fibers that are there to process visual information, while our auditory nerves that is there to process sound only has 30,000 fibers. So if so much of our brain power is dedicated to processing visual information, that means we tend to process visual information faster, quicker. Visual information appeals to our emotions in a much quicker way. So that's why we tend to be persuaded by it much quicker than text. And once we see something, we're unable to not see it. So we may see an image that impacts us, that affects us. And then if somebody tells us, no, actually, that's not what the image shows it is. Let's say the news media used this image of one country, but it was on another, that we can still not unsee what we've seen, because cognitively, that's how our brains work. So when it comes to entertainment, when it comes to TV and film, I don't know whether the TV show Severance is big in Brazil. It's big in the US, so I've watched it. And so when I talk to my friends about Severance, and I have one interpretation of the episode, my friends have a different interpretation. That's fun because it's entertainment. We are entertained like that. If we don't understand something or we understand it differently, that can be a fun conversation. But in a court of law, where somebody's guilt or innocence is at stake, whether somebody goes to jail or not is at stake, suddenly our different interpretations can be a problem. We need to come to a shared understanding about what a video shows, what a video means, because if we have a shared understanding, we're more likely to, if we're, let's say, jurors, if we're on a jury trial, we're more likely to come to a better understanding about what's happening. And so, to me, much is lost in the translation of images into words. And in a legal context, what is lost in that translation can cost somebody their life and livelihood. So to me, it's important to engage about questions of media and visual media and video and law, not just in text, but also on the terms of video, on the terms of images themselves. And this is why I think that this is what I'm showing you as one example of where multimodal research can be very powerful. So what you see on the screen is the kind of advertisement for my Justice by Video exhibit, which I set up with 3 PhD students throughout Colorado. So we set it up in 4 different cities, mostly in rural Colorado, so outside of the main cities, because we wanted to bring this research and projects to people who are affected by courts, right? It's like anybody in our community can end up maybe not as a party that is accused of a crime in a court, but maybe can be involved as a witness to a crime, can be brought in to testify. So it's important to talk about the challenges with video, with actual people, with communities, with constituencies who are affected by what's happening in the court system. So we took it in 4 cities, and actually this summer, this exhibition will also be set up at the IMCR Congress in Singapore. So if any one of you are coming to Singapore, you'll be able to see the exhibit that I'm now talking about. But what was the stake of this? So what was the research problem that I tried to address with this exhibit? So we know that today's courts, not just in the United States, I know in Brazil, in Europe, everywhere really, are using video as evidence way more than they've done in the past, because people are recording video on their cell phone cameras. Police officers have their body cameras, dashboard cameras, there are surveillance cameras everywhere in our cities. So video is everywhere, and thus video is more used in courts than before. Now, in the US, the Department of Justice estimates that video appears in about 80% of criminal cases. Think about it. 80% of criminal cases use video. So that's like a lot. It means majority of cases have video as evidence. But US courts lack clear guidelines on how video can be used and presented as evidence. What the legal system assumes is that video evidence need not be governed by any standards because seeing is intuitive. We all see the same thing. We all see the same truth. So what's the point in coming up with guidelines? Thus lies the problem. We all saw an image and thought about different things. People see images constantly, arrive at different conclusions. As I said, that's fantastic in popular culture and entertainment. That's a problem in courts. So what that has meant that judges, lawyers, and jurors treat video in highly varied ways that has led to uneven and unfair renderings of justice. So as one example, I'm going to show you a video. This is an old one, but this is the video that we used in the exhibit. So I'm going to walk you through that. So what was this case about? So a 19-year-old black man from Georgia was leaving work. He was at school, then he was at work, was leaving work, was very tired, and he was speeding. So let's say if he was supposed to drive 60 kilometers an hour, he was driving 70 kilometers an hour. So a police car notices and starts going after him. But rather than the driver stopping, the driver keeps speeding. So at some point, he's reaching like 160 kilometers an hour on a road where the maximum is 60 kilometers an hour. Okay, well, a second police car joins this and becomes suddenly a car chase. So two police cars are going after the guy. Everything is recorded on two cameras on the police cars. They are called dashboard cameras in the US. And what happens, they're speeding so much that at some point, one of the police officers calls the commanders in the police station and says, we're going in this speed. This is what's happening. We can't get the driver. Should we do this one maneuver to stop the chase and identify the driver, give him ticket, etc., etc.? Now the commander says, is it safe for you to do that maneuver? The police officer says, I don't think so. I think we're driving too fast. So he doesn't get the permission to do that maneuver. But he goes on for another minute and he decides to do the maneuver. And what he does is crashes into the car goes after the road, and the driver is left paralyzed. Okay, I'll show you just a very brief 10 seconds of the chase up until the moment you see the car kind of going after the road. So let me show you briefly this video. Okay, so it's unclear what's happening. The audio is barely understandable, but this is the final car crash. Okay, so the driver, because he was 19-year-old and now he's paralyzed for life. He has to be in a wheelchair. This car chase made him paralyzed. He decides to sue the police officers who were chasing him and say that they violated his constitutional rights. Now, I don't expect you to be experts in US law, but basically, the argument is that the police officer didn't really have a reason to chase for him. The driver argued maybe they could have got his registration license plates, follow up later, etc., that there was no need to do this. Okay, the first court says the facts are unclear here. We have the testimony of the police officer, we have the testimony of the driver, we have the video. This case is complicated, is what they're saying, because it could be that the police officer had to do this, but at the same time, the police officer were not given the right to do the maneuver. The driver is paralyzed. It's complicated. What the first court says, let this case go to a jury trial so that a jury decides. So they're not ruling. They're just saying there has to be a proper trial. Everybody with their attorney needs to come to court and then present the facts in the case and let a jury decide. Okay, the police officer is unhappy with the ruling of the court, so he appeals. He goes to the appellate court. The appellate court agrees with the lower court. The appellate court also says, sorry, police officer, like, it's unclear. You may have done something wrong. Like, there has to be a full court trial and let a jury decide. Okay, the police officer is unhappy again, appeals the case at the US Supreme Court. That's the final decision. After the Supreme Court, you can't go anywhere. The Supreme Court takes the case and says, discusses the case. Now, one thing I want to tell you also is when the driver was asked, why didn't you just stop? I mean, you were only speeding by 10 kilometers an hour more. Why didn't you stop for the officer? He says, I'm a black man. If I get pulled over by a police officer, I fear for my life. I don't know whether I'll be alive. I don't know how that. So he was like, I was afraid, I was scared. I thought I would lose the police officer, and that's why I was speeding. So that's his testimony. The police officer is saying this is a reckless driver. He was speeding so much. He was endangering other cars. He was endangering passerbys, people on the road. And the police officer had no other option but to perform the maneuver and to end the chase. So those are the two testimonies. And then we have the video. So the Supreme Court justices in the United States look at this video. This case, the incident is from 2001. The case goes to court in 2007. And so what one Supreme Court judge says is like, oh my God, this is like the worst car chase of the most frightening kind. He relates this to the movie, The French Connection. On your right, you see that Hollywood movie. It's too old now. You maybe not have seen it, but back in the 70s, it was a very famous movie. And so also shows how old the justices were at the time. But they're comparing to a car chase in a Hollywood movie, and they say, this is awful. The police officer had to do what they did. Now, visual epistemology, I want to show you the justices didn't focus on the video that they had in the court case, but they related it to a Hollywood movie and were like, oh yeah, this reminds me of a Hollywood movie. This must be bad. So relational logic of images, how what we are experiencing in real life can go in court. And in the ruling, 8-1, it was 8-1. 8 justices says the case is clear from the videotape. The police officer had to do what he had to do, and the driver was at fault. Now, they even wrote, the case is clear from the videotape. Only one justice was uncomfortable with this decision and says, this is real life, this is not Hollywood. It's unclear whether the driver endangered anybody because we can count on the video how many times he passed on red light or green light. We can see how many cars were there or not. And it's unclear. So he was uncomfortable with this. But the ruling went out. The case is clear from the videotape. And the Supreme Court was actually so sure that everybody would agree with their interpretation that they posted the video on their website and told the American people, okay, you can watch the video for yourself. Well, great. 3 researchers had decided to do a study on this. They were like, is this really clear from the video? And they designed an experiment. They asked many people what they think. And what they found is that people's race, people ethnicity, people education level, income level, political beliefs, identification with police officers, all of those came to bear on how they were interpreting the video. So Black people tended to identify with the driver, and they were like, yeah, the police officer had no business doing this. They violated the driver's constitutional right, and the driver is left paralyzed for life. So just to show you some of the differences. So Scott versus Harris, this one Supreme Court case, is just one well-known example in the United States that demonstrates the intricacies of seeing video and how courts may interpret it differently, even within the lifespan of the same case, right? So it shows that video doesn't speak for itself. It doesn't provide a single objective window onto the truth, but courts may interpret video evidence differently, even within the same case, because if you remember, 2 prior courts said, this video is unclear, let a jury decide. And the 3rd court, the Supreme Court, says, oh, everything is clear from the video. Lower courts, you've been engaging in fiction. We don't know what you were thinking about. Of course, the police officer did everything right. So very diverse treatment of video. Now, it's not just about who we are that shapes what we see. Sometimes even the video format itself, right? That's why I talked about visual epistemology, can shape interpretation. So there are multiple studies over 30 years that talk about the camera perspective bias. So in the United States, when you are called into a police station to give a confession or you're interrogated about a crime, you're being video recorded. And so researchers said, well, let's see whether the camera perspective makes a difference. And so when you have the same event, the same confession, same people, everything, what they did is they had 3 cameras in the room. One is just showing the person who gives the confession, the other just the police officer, and the third camera records them both. It's all in real time. People who see just the suspect giving the confession in this image, they say, okay, the suspect must be guilty of the crime and the confession is voluntary. The police officer doesn't do any coercion. Why they say that? Because they think when the suspect looks down, when his hands is on his face, he seems like he's uncomfortable. It seems like he's sweating, he's looking down, he doesn't want to look at the police officer. And based on those things, viewers, audiences say, okay, he's guilty. He's just, maybe doesn't feel comfortable that he committed a crime, but everything is voluntary, no problem. Okay, same confession, but now we have the camera angle that shows both the police officer and the suspect. And suddenly people are saying, oh my God, look at the police officer. He's in such authority. He's trying to coerce the suspect. And suddenly people think, oh, it's the confession is not voluntary. The suspect is not guilty. You see, it's the manipulation of the camera perspective, how this is recorded. It's the same words, the same testimony, the same incident, the same people, everything is the same. The only thing that changes is the camera perspective, and people arrive at a vastly different conclusion about what's happening, which has high stakes in a court of law. Now, let me give you another example. Here's where scholars studied the same incident, but one recorded on a dashboard camera, that's the wider angle that you see on the left, and the other is from a police body camera, a camera mounted on the police officer's body. And people have a different interpretation of the police officer behavior based on the camera. It's the same incident. Everything is the same. It's the same police officer. It's just that we have two camera perspectives, and people who see the body camera believe that the police officer did something wrong. People who see the dashboard camera don't think the police officer did anything wrong. So this is just the manipulation of the medium. This is not even starting to think about questions around race, questions around politics, who we are, what experiences we have. But this is to show you how video is treated unevenly, and short of any guidelines, it's very complicated. We have inconsistent renderings of justice. So in my work, I've shown how three related factors have contributed to the variant treatment of video as evidence. The first is the uncertainty within the legal system regarding the classification of video as evidence. What do I mean here? Typically, video is assumed in the US that it demonstrates merely what witnesses say. So in the video I showed you, in the case with the police car chase, the assumption was that video can only say what police officers are saying or what a witness says. Now, to not bother you with the legality, but in that case, they were actually supposed to look at the video in light of what the driver said. Now, if they did this, they might have arrived at a different conclusion. But instead, contrary to this idea that video merely demonstrates what people are saying, the justices uses that direct evidence, interpreted as very valuable, powerful, very clear evidence of what's happening, and ruled in favor of the police officer. Now, while this may be a complicated case, it's actually different courts are still grappling with, is video just a demonstrative evidence? Is video direct evidence capable of proving facts on its own? It's unclear, but at the heart of this shifting and ambivalent categories under which video can be admitted as evidence is an uncertainty about how to evaluate video's probative value or the degree to which it can prove the facts it is offered to prove. Now, another thing is what we've discussed so far, the discrepancies between visual perception and interpretation. How people see and interpret video is driven by cognitive and social factors. The legal system unregulated approach to video evidence thus risks uneven and even wrong, erroneous interpretations. Decades of visual communication research demonstrate that perception may be selective, biased, and shaped by motivated reasoning, to name just a few variables. Furthermore, a growing body of interdisciplinary research has examined the influence of endogenous biases like prior attitudes and groups identities, who we are, our race, our ethnicity, and how that shapes what we are seeing, but also exogenous biases. These are features of the medium or the viewing context. Examples of this would be the Lev-Kuleshov experiment, would be the camera perspective, would be also the dashboard camera versus the police body camera, and how they shape interpretation differently, right? So the idea here is that if we don't have guidance for how to evaluate video as evidence and come at a shared understanding, we are really contributing to discrepancy in which civil rights and human rights violations get recognized and redeemed, and why and how. And the last point is that the legal profession has not given video the same attention it has given to textual and testimonial evidence. Though there are more trial advocacy programs today that teach how to interrogate video, visual literacy training is still not broadly represented in law school curricula and professional programs. Visual literacy for the legal profession remains an important call, for it can help judges and attorneys learn how to analyze video as evidence, how to probe and ask relevant questions about the underlying content. So all of this information came into my multimodal research project, Justice by Video. What we did is set this project in three parts with an introduction. So what you see here on the screen is the introduction. People came, read briefly about the challenges with video evidence, how this interactive exhibition explores the intricacies of seeing video in court, and then they watched a video that gave them the instructions for what they're supposed to do in the exhibit. Now, in the first part, we called it courtroom experiment. So there were two TV screens. One was showing the video that you saw of the police car chase, the Scott versus Harris case, the police car chase, right? They saw the whole video. I showed you here just 10 seconds, but for the exhibit, people saw the whole video. Now, they saw it multiple times, and each time, the second TV screen gave them more information about the case and some questions. Now, the first question was, how would you describe what you're seeing? People watched the video, and then they had a very open-ended question, how would you describe what you're seeing? They were asked to use their phone to scan a QR code and answer the question. Then we showed the video again, and people were given more information. That this is a black driver, 19-year-old, this is how the speed is, this is what the police officer is doing, etc. We asked them a second question. Again, people scanned the QR code, answered the question. And then the third viewing, we gave more information, and then again asked people a third separate question. So that was the courtroom experience. It was an interactive viewing exercise. People watched the video, scanned the QR code, and were answering questions. And we did this exhibit in different places. So here you see the QR code. Some places people were standing, watching. Here we had the TV on the ground, scanning the QR code. And this is the first question. How would you describe what you're seeing? Okay. In the second part was called processing. Here we had three different tablets with research studies on video, that people watched video on different research studies that walked them through the complexities of visual epistemology. So we walked them through the camera perception bias that I showed you. We talked about the differences between police body camera and dashboard camera, but we also talked about seeing more broadly how race and gender, ethnicity, identity shape what we're seeing. So the idea here was that people came in, put on the headphones, watched the video, and engaged. And we called it processing because it was giving people more context for how to understand the viewing exercise. So you see here three different videos. People rotated, engaged, watched the material. And now the last part, this was called reflection. And so here is where we projected on a screen both what everybody has been answering to the questions, but also experts from which each of those courts ruled on the case, the three different courts, and how different the rulings were of those courts and how differently they looked at this video. So here you see, how would you describe what you're seeing? And we have everybody's answer kind of scrolling through the screen. The second, the third question, and on the next screen is what the justices said. So here is a different perspective. And in other place, again, you see, so the only dissenting Supreme Court justice said 8 of the jurors on this court reach a verdict that differs from the views of the judges on both the district court and the Court of Appeals, who are surely more familiar with the hazards of driving on Georgia roads than we are. This is hardly the stuff of Hollywood. This is the one judge who disagreed with everybody else. So let me walk you through some of the answers that people gave us. So the first question, how would you describe what you're seeing? No context. So people just saw a video and then very open-ended question, how would you describe what you're seeing? Some of the answers, car chased by cops bumped him, he crashed. High-speed chase, looks like both fleeing car and police car are putting others in danger, is what somebody else is saying. Then somebody says, how would you describe what you're seeing? Very dangerous driving that the police are trying to stop by getting in the way. Okay, you see the differences in these responses. Fourth answer, a police car chase, not very high speed, but obvious panic from the driver. It is interesting to see the driver still showing concern for his fellow drivers, using turn signals and slowing down to ensure the cars around are not out in danger. While the driving is obviously reckless, it is almost a respectful recklessness. So here you're saying very dangerous driving, police are trying to prevent damage, and here is something very different. You see, very different interpretation by different people. Now, the second question, and they're given more information about the case, says, how would you decide whether Harris put any drivers, pedestrians, or police officer at risk of injury or death? Now, based on your answer to this question, you will rule either in favor of the officers or the driver, right? That's why it's important to ask this question. Okay, so here are some answers. I don't know how anyone can decide based on this footage. So somebody says, I don't have enough information. I have no idea. Okay, a second person. Harris clearly put many motorists in danger while traveling at an unsafe speed, going through a red light, passing in no passing zones, and driving erratically at night. So, okay, this person is sure the driver did something awful. Okay, next person. Maybe it's hard to tell, but I don't think there's that much traffic for him to put anyone at risk. Again, polar opposite, very different response about what's happening. So somebody else says, why were they chasing him in the first place? If he wasn't armed, then the chase itself is the most dangerous thing. They have his car information. Why not let him get away and follow up later? De-escalate the situation. Okay, so you see a range of responses. Now, the last question, was Officer Scott's action justified or unjustified? And please tell us why, right? This is the ultimate ruling in the case. Was the officer justified in what he did or not? A police officer's job is to protect the public, and when someone is acting in a way that is dangerous to the public, they should intervene. Okay, somebody clearly says the officer is justified. Somebody else, I don't believe that Officer Scott's actions were justified. He didn't have to take such extreme action. I think his actions were too extreme given the situation. So these were, and of course, when we ended the exhibit, we gave them more information, some research studies they can read, and here is the postcard that people got. So why did I did this video exhibit? And I should also say, once people went through all 3 parts of the exhibit, then we have a community forum where I was there with my PhD students and everybody who came to see the exhibit, and we had a conversation because we wanted to talk to people. Okay, now that you all saw how differently you all responded, if we are a jury in a court trial, what can we do? How can we approach this question so that we're not randomly decided who goes to jail and who doesn't? So my core argument for why I did this exhibit, why I think is this important, is that multimodal approaches are particularly well suited to think about guidelines for video evidence because they facilitate a direct engagement with the particularities of audio-visual ways of knowing. Such an approach is not just a thought experiment. Engagement with visual epistemologies through both theory and practice across media and law is critical for ensuring that justice works for the public good. If we engage with visual epistemologies through theory and practice, that engagement holds the potential to improve people's lives by promoting consistency, equality, and fairness for those who use the courts. And on that note, I thank you so much for your time, for listening, and I'm excited to hear what questions you may have for me.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Your work is wonderful, original, and very important. And let me ask in Portuguese for our audience. Alguém tem alguma pergunta para a professora Sandra Ristovska? Por favor, colocar na tela a pergunta, por favor, identificando o estudante ou a estudante. No? Sandra, let me start the question. Not exactly about your work, but about the multimodal communication. It seems that we are in a time tunnel. We need to back to talk about knowledge being theoretical and practical, and talk about the interning of art and science. Do you believe that this idea is not new, is now relevant to our times? Is it it's time for multimodal communication? Now is our time?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the way I would answer your question is to think about both the technological and cultural factors, right? So purely on technology itself, we, from day one, when we go to school, we learn the alphabet, we learn how to read and write, we read novels, we learn how to do summaries, we learn how to write essays, then we start learning about research essays, etc. We also learn how to do numbers, right? We take math from the first time we go to school. So we learned how to do basic maths, etc. But we never do anything about images. We don't spend that much time on images and sound, right? At the same time, when I ask my own students, it's like, how do you read the news? They say, oh, I go on TikTok. Okay, how do you search for information online? They say, well, if I have to write a paper for your class, I'll go on Google, but Google is for old people. We go on TikTok. So what is TikTok? TikTok is audiovisual. It's like short videos. So the main way in which people today communicate is multimodal. Involves images, involves sounds, involves text. And yet, in an academic context, in the scientific context, we've spent all this time on text and numbers and that we've neglected images. So I think technologically what's happening is there is a disconnect between what we teach and how we approach things in institutions, in science, in academia, and what people are experiencing. Now, culturally, culturally, we're experiencing, for example, the rise of right-wing authoritarianism around the world in many different countries. Part of that has been, we've seen a serious attack on academic institutions, on universities, on scientific institutions, on the value of science, even really challenges about what is fact, what is information today. Now, how do we expect people to care about universities, to care about science, if they don't see how they themselves directly benefit from science, how they themselves directly benefit from the academic knowledge? Because, of course, when we're at a university and a science, we want to contribute to the public good, especially those of us that work at public universities. Like, it's our civic duty to educate the next generation, to do research that can help move society forward. And yet people are completely clueless about what we're doing. They tend to think, oh, you're just elitist, you are paid too much money, you travel all over the world and you do nothing. At least that's what's happening in the US. And that actually, to an extent, is what's happening in Macedonia. Like, if you ask any professor, the summer is where they write books, they write articles, they go to conferences, and yet the general public thinks, oh, you're just 3 months of vacation, holiday, paid, no problem, right? That's not how it works. So multimodality also gives us an opportunity to address people in a medium that is more easily acceptable to them, more easily just gesturable, right? We cannot expect, like, I don't know, my neighbor to read my book. I cannot expect that. She's busy, she has day-to-day job, she works in a different field, etc. But if I want to tell her that my book is important for her life, if I put it in a video, if I put it in an exhibit and say, come do this, right? For this, why did this project on video evidence as an exhibit? Because I knew people would come and watch it. I've published 2 books on that. How many people read it? I don't know, but not many. You see, so multimodality really helps us democratize knowledge. And the time is now, because we have to engage publics. We have to engage constituencies. We have to explain why research matters and how research matters. And then lastly, and very selfishly, even in academic context, we can be better researchers if for some of the questions we are asking, we approach the right methodological tool. So for example, when our students come in media and communication studies schools, we tell them, oh, if you have hypotheses and if you want to draw correlations, etc., well, you have to do a quantitative research. Maybe you use survey, maybe you use experiments, etc., right? If people want to do ethnography, we teach them differently. Why don't we do that with the different tools as well, right? Multimodality can also expand our toolkit. Oh, your project may benefit from video, use video. So I think it's technologically, we better do multimodality now, because otherwise, the train is going. Are we going to get on it prepared, or are we going to go, screaming and unprepared? So that's the technology point. The second point is, I think, culturally, politically, societally, what's happening, and the need for academics to better communicate the value and importance of knowledge and how it relates to people's life. And then lastly, to be better researchers, there are stakes even for us in the academia.
Okay. And Sandra, there is another question.
Yes.
Natalia, can you read?
Yes, I can read it. So Natalia asked, after publication, was there any change in the policy on the use of video by courts or any contact from them about how to improve the existing processes? Thank you for this question. So it's not easy to change legal processes, but I just founded the Visual Evidence Lab at the University of Colorado Boulder. We had our launch last Friday, and I brought in judges. I brought in scholars from across different fields. I brought in journalists, documentary filmmakers, and human rights activists to discuss about what legal processes can be improved and where and how research can help. So this is an ongoing work on which I am engaged, and there will be white papers published later this summer based on this conference that I'm happy to share with Pedro, and he can share with you if you're interested.
Thank you. And Sandra, I have another question. It's the same schedule about the multimodality and communication. I'd like to know about your consideration, the new EIMSR Multimodal Communication Research Group. What are the biggest challenges for a group that deals with art and academic research between art and science?
Yeah.
What our big challenge?
I mean, I will tell you, right? Academic conferences are set up where people present papers. So there is a laptop, a projector, people go talk about their paper, and that's it. And so any conference IMCR itself knows how to do that. This year, because we started as a multimodal group, we had proposals for exhibitions. I submitted my exhibition. Other colleagues submitted their exhibition. Some people wanted to do performance, right? Because multimodality has many components. It's been a challenge to even figure it out how to get the space to hold this program, because people are used to the traditional format. Our partners, the local organizing committee in Singapore, has been absolutely amazing because they worked with us. I actually had a meeting with them last evening to figure out how to do it. But that's not a guarantee that every year, every university would give us the space to showcase this kind of work. So that's an ongoing battle. IMCR gave us the working group, here you go, but they assume we will do what everybody else does. And here we are saying no, and suddenly everybody's like, oh goodness, how do we navigate this? So that's going to be a challenge for us for years to come. Now, second thing, why this practical challenge comes, because theoretically, conceptually, I don't think everybody in media and communication studies still understands what this work is. So I think we're still doing, those of us who engage with multimodal projects, Pedro, you and I are among them, other colleagues as well, we are not only doing this work and doing this research, but we're doing double duty. We're doing this research, and then we're educating the rest of our colleagues on the importance of this work. And so because we're still in the process of educating, we're, we have these practical challenges. And then I should also say, beyond even just IMCR, this work is expensive to, edit, to put the video together. In the case of Exhibit, to go elsewhere. And many universities around the world really are at points where funds are short. They're cuts all the time. And so if somebody says, oh, I'm going to do, let's say, an ethnography on this, and I'm going to write a book, sometimes that seems more reasonable than if, Pedro, you and I go and say, we'll do an audiovisual essay that has this importance. So that's where we still need to do the education component and say, no, like you can't compare them. These are apple and oranges. They're both valid. We need them both in media and communication studies. But here is the value of this. So I think the education remains still like opportunity, but also it's a challenge because we still haven't done the education component. We encounter all sorts of practical issues within the conference itself, but also in our work writ large.
Ok. A message in Portuguese. Tem uma lista de presença aí para os alunos da disciplina em especial para assinar a lista de presença. É uma lista de presença para cada palestra. Sandra, there is another question for you in a screen, please.
How to keep serious content on TikTok and attract a qualified audience and misinformation. Oh, goodness. I'm not sure we can ever do the quality content. What I think we can do better is around education on media literacy as one step, really, so people are better able to assess that. The question of content moderation, regulation, etc. It's another complex one that merits, because I don't think it should all be on consumers. We do have, social media companies have turned into big monopolies and corporations that are there to profit on us, and it's not in their interest to give quality content. And so how we are tackling that, well, discussions of antitrust lawsuits finally are gaining some prominence in the United States. We don't know elsewhere in the world, but I almost think like we have to leave outside social media, right? This is why for this project, for example, I did it in public libraries. I did it in community centers because I just wanted to go where people go, because it's very important for us to meet face-to-face and to talk as communities. That's going to help us address some of the challenges and issues with social media. But I don't have a bulletproof answer. I'm sorry. That's a hard one. Okay.
Okay, so that is the last question.
Luana. Yeah, I see Luana. Are we heading towards a dystopia in which judgments can sometimes be distorted from reality and thus injustices will be committed too much? I wouldn't say we're heading this to dystopia, because some of these issues has always been with us, right? I often, when I do this work, and my next book is on the legal and social history of technological manipulation of evidentiary images. Why? Because people say, okay, this is bad as it is, and now with AI and deepfakes videos, suddenly everything will go, where it shouldn't. And I say, well, we've always had to deal with these issues. So where I stand, where I find maybe hope, is that it's on us whether we solve this or not, right? Like through our research, through our community engagement, through policy making, we can help this. No legal case will ever be perfect, right? Because we are talking about the challenges with video evidence. There are challenges with any type of evidence, right? Where I stand is I want us to create an environment where we can use video and AI technologies more equitably in a court of law, where we work to make things better. But I say we've always had challenges. We've always had challenges with any technologies. The US legal system is shaped by a racial and ethnic disparities across the board. That has always been the case. But at the same time, there are moments where progress has happened, where certain steps have been taken. And that's where I'm trying to find inspiration, because otherwise, if we say we're living to a dystopia, that means what do? We do nothing. And I want us to think about how we can engage. And again, another reason why multimodality matters to me, because if I just write a book on this, very few people will read it and very few people will take it seriously. But if I do multimodal projects, I can expand the reach of my work. I can engage more people. I can engage more publics. At the very least, I can make people to care and start asking questions about this. Because I want to believe that there are more well-meaning people in this planet than, those that do harm. And if all of us who have good intentions come together, I do think we can see some change and some progress. So thank you for that question.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And see you next July in Singapore. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Pedro, for inviting me. Thank you all for your attention and for the questions. And I would look forward to, feel free to email me if you want to follow up, if you have any questions. Pedro has my contact information as well. And if any one of you are coming to IMCR in Singapore, come see the exhibit so you experience it yourself. But also come talk to me and tell me about what you're doing, what you're researching. And if there's any way I can help, I will be happy to.
Thank you very much for our students too. E terminamos assim a nossa primeira palestra do Seminário Internacional de Comunicação Multimodal com a professora pesquisadora Sandra Ristovska, da Universidade do Colorado, em Boulder, nos Estados Unidos. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you all. Have a good day. Bye-bye.